Good evening.
Hey everyone,
Hello.
welcome. I'm excited for this event.
Oh, we're glad you could join us. I know it's, for some people it's dinner time, for some people it's the middle of the afternoon, so.
Yeah. It is. I'm in Nebraska, so it's almost 5 p.m. So I'm like an hour behind you. Behind at least like Eastern time. I don't know, but you guys, a lot of people are here.
So some are Eastern, some are other places, the Delta place.
Awesome.
We're just gonna kind of hang out and wait for people to join. Again, feel free to have. It is hard on Zoom to do any sort of pre-event like chatting. It's just a weird.
I mean, now we're spoiled with spatial chat, right? Like nothing can compare with that.
Right?
Yeah, I love that.
You just can't do that with this many people. Oh, Joni, it's time.
I know it is. You just have to hold my hand and walk me through it.
It's fairly intuitive. Once you get there, it's fairly intuitive.
Yeah.
Except it always seems to drop you right in the middle of at least for me, it always drops me into Delsis. No matter where I want to be, that's where it drops me, and I have to move to wherever I wanted to be.
This is the most popular and cool one, huh?
Or they, I don't know. I have no idea why. More than once, I got dropped right into the middle of a conversation in the middle of that room. So.
That's the fun of it too, just being little bubbles that drop, like little droplets, and who knows where you end up.
Yeah, there was somebody that was, I don't know, when somebody left, they're like, oh look, it's just like bubbles are popping. Like, what?
Yeah.
Welcome everybody. And I will say, as people are coming on, I recognize what time it is. Also, this again, when more people are on, we may see my children walking in and out, eating, right? Like, all of that is fine. So if kids come in and out, if your, family pet decides to visit, we're all going to roll on however this happens tonight. So don't feel concerned, because I see a little one who's loving being on video already. So
say hi.
Hi. She's like, I don't know all you people.
Yeah, she's an extra member for this event.
The more the merrier.
Sorry, I didn't register her.
Oh, yeah, you're fine. Not a problem. No, make this all happen.
You have to listen.
Hi, Kurt.
Hi, Maria. You did not have the women's event this year?
What was that?
You did not have the women's event this year?
No, there's no women's event. Just this event with the virtual conference this year. Yeah.
I usually try and register early on because it's so difficult to get to that event. So I was like, did I miss it or?
No,
not this year. They ask us to try and, because of the challenges with the virtual event and the number of events, to try and, usually we do 3 events. So try and do 1. So we're going to try and encompass everything and deal a little bit with intersectionality in the conversations we're having today, and do our best. But I can't say this because I'm not in charge anymore, but I'm going to say it'll be back next year. That's really up to Austin.
No, but I've been meaning to write to Maria for a long time. So last year, like actually after that, it was based on those lean-in principles. So, I did take it back to work, and we did like a similar event at work. I work for Berkeley Corporation, and so I had like a similar small workshop arranged for like 10 women over there, but everybody really appreciated it, so it was nice.
That's really great to hear. I'm so happy that you found that information helpful and were able to apply it to your work there.
joining out. We're still a little early, so I'm just gonna, again, keep chatting amongst yourselves as much as you can with the growing numbers. We'll probably give people until 2 or 3 after or so before we really get started. So if you need to go grab something to drink, something to eat, feel free to do that as we kind of wait for everybody to join.
Yeah, it's all in the corner over there, right on that table.
Right. You didn't see that on the way in? The food that's sitting over there?
Ajit, I did notice that. That was very good.
I got another
planting.
thing too. I'm
Very
splitting the
good.
swag so that
Very
hopefully
good.
people will go and get swag from this year's meeting because there is some. There you go.
There
Johnny's
is.
got it too.
As I said, Johnny and I are sporting our what is it? That 2 years ago. We're all together.
I tried to turn it so that when I drink it, it'll show.
Right?
There we go.
Make it clear, we're sporting the ASB gear today.
Except for it's almost out of water, so I have to go to my next one that's not labeled. Yeah, but Mary Rogers has ASB in the background.
I know, she's got the cool background. I was not gifted with that background. I didn't share that.
Where is it, Mary? Oh, it is still there, sort of.
The edge of it.
Yeah.
I can't figure out why it's not taking the whole thing.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so if I keep doing this,
The whole meeting.
how's that?
It's funny. You've got this aura about your hair that's just like keeping it away.
My little nieces played hours with that thing. We could have all
virtual
laughed at
backgrounds.
the video conference.
That's funny. I haven't seen it before do that.
It often has to do with where the light is coming into the room and how that impacts
Maybe the time of day. Do you have windows? Is it different?
Yes, if she's windows, that'll change.
There
Oh, that made a difference. Okay.
There was someone in my lab that just was confused looking for the email link for the Zoom, or the Zoom link. I thought it was an email, but is there a way we can send out like a quick reminder or like a reply all type thing?
It was multiple emails that went out, but sure, let me work on doing that. I will mute myself, you all keep talking, and I will send that out.
All right. Did everybody have a good day so far today? I should do a poll. I don't know how to do polls though, so sorry. No polls. I haven't figured that stuff out yet.
Yeah, we could have had some little icebreakers.
All right, let's see. I guess I didn't see how many people. We got 109, so there's probably quite a few people who are still trying to get connected. So I guess we will give it a couple more minutes. And I guess first ground rule for everybody is if you feel like you want to eat because it's time to eat, by all means, eat or drink while you're on the Zoom. Nobody will mind, as long as you're not doing something really crinkly.
And if you are, just mute. It's fine. You can do something really crinkly.
Right.
We had a, I think we still do allow potato chips at our noon meetings, but there was a group that didn't like those because of how crinkly they were, because we were in a pretty small room and everybody would be opening them and crunching and couldn't hear the speakers. We didn't have the option to Zoom. We were in person. I mean, to mute. We were in person.
Feel like this is a loaded question to ask, but I'm from Canada. Is everybody teaching online in the fall, or do people have to teach in person with reduced classes, or are you trying to teach? Nobody has to teach like full class loads, right? Or are you doing a weird hybrid situation?
I don't know how many have started. How many have started?
We start Monday.
Start Monday. Yeah. Oh yeah, the chat has a few answers there. Hybrid. I think Minnesota's hybrid.
In person. Yeah, I guess we should do a flood the chat, right? Anybody who was on the teaching tutorial.
Well, stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, no kidding. I think we have to really congratulate the organizers for putting on such a great meeting, and it's hard to, I mean, and they made the right choice, obviously. We couldn't have held it, but it was still
Yes, if
agonizing,
nobody
I think.
does it, I will give sincere thanks to the organizers. I was skeptical of this virtual meeting, but frankly, I've had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We did it. We pulled it off.
Yeah, very nice job.
Yay.
I prefer this. I'd do this again next year. This is great.
How long have you been like immersed all day, or do you
Yeah, I've been pretty
do
involved in this. It's been really good. The conference has been great, and I can duck out and eat food and, you know, not travel for 20 hours. This is awesome.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pluses.
I kind of like the version. I like the version of posters. There's a little bit more time to think about your. If you can manage to go see the posters, think about the questions without.
Yeah.
I like the idea of allowing undergrads to join in, because oftentimes we don't have enough resources to get them all on location, and to have them tune in remotely has been phenomenal.
Yeah, well, even for me, just being able to, without having to fly to Georgia, like flying to Georgia, we can't. There's no flights in and out of Canada right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I wonder how many, does anybody know how many people we have that are from out of the United States?
I'm here in Quebec.
Yeah, probably quite a few. From
where, by the way, masks are compulsories anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, same in Nova Scotia, Cecile.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
We went compulsory on Friday.
And people are wearing them.
People are wearing them. Yeah, but we've only had almost all of our cases in my province have been in one long-term care facility, and or closely related to that. So, or now we are having some migrant workers come in that are positive. So,
yeah, it's such an evolving thing. None of us really know enough. I mean, you can't. It's new. I guess it's if you could be detached from it, it could be, you know, a learning experience of how we're accumulating the knowledge and moving on and changing our thoughts and reinforcing our thoughts and doing it in a positive scientific way. But I'm not sure that's happening.
I see Alina's playing it cool tonight.
Yeah.
She's outside, just like rocking it.
Just got to go grab a beer.
Whenever you need to, feel free to go do that. If it's okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm trying to troubleshoot problems on the side too. So I'm going to go ahead and just introduce myself and welcome everybody, and then I'll be passing it over to some others to kind of move forward. So I want to welcome you all. I want to acknowledge the fact that we've already spoken about this. This was not how we all intended necessarily to have ASB2020 or specifically this event. Please do feel free to get up, get a drink, get something to eat. It's kind of different times for different people. There's been a lot going on, you know, in the world and at our own institutions. So understanding the challenges that we're all facing right now. My hope for the event, and again, sorry, I should introduce myself first. My name's there. I'm Robin Quinn. I'm the outgoing diversity chair for the ASB. And it's my pleasure to work with the committee in putting this event together tonight. And our hope really is that by the end, we will have had the opportunity to brainstorm and think about a lot of these systemic barriers that exist in STEM broadly. We are talking a lot about the academic setting, but I'd like us to think more broadly about that as well for those that are engaged in national labs or in industry, because these concerns are more broad than just in the academic setting. So I am going to step away, not away, but I'm going to be trying to make sure everybody gets into the breakout rooms so they'll be able to have conversations there. If something comes up, I'm going to drop in the chat my email address. I will be monitoring my email as well. So if you have trouble either getting into a room or you get knocked out of a room or whatever, I'll stay kind of in this main room the whole time. I do want to let everybody know we are recording this main room and not the breakout session. So just be aware of that. That was intentional on our part so that we can have more free and open conversations. So I'm going to pass now over to Ajit and Jordan, who are going to walk you through the rest of the program this evening. So thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, Robin. And thanks, I guess I'll be the first to thank Robin for the last 3 years of leading as the diversity chair for ASB. And as she mentioned, I'm the incoming diversity chair. My pronouns are he, him, his. I invite all of you to make sure that your name on Zoom is what you want it to be. We have set it up so that you can change your name, update your name if you like. So welcome to this virtual diversity event. And we wanted to do an event this time coming on the heels of the ASB statement on racism, systemic racism, and of course all the events that have been happening over the past many months. There's definitely a need to address systemic barriers in STEM. And in the ASB, I don't know what the name, is there an actual name of the group? The Black Biomechanists Affinity Group, I guess that's a name, yesterday, talking about how, you know, it's important and good to have a statement, but it's got to be followed by action. But of course, most of us have at best a small piece of knowledge and understanding about everything that's going on and all the barriers that exist. So we thought it would be really important to start with essentially a listening / brainstorming session to talk about the barriers that exist and how we might solve them. So Jordan is going to talk more specifically about sort of the exact structure of the event, but I just wanted to start with some community agreements. So we're going to be talking about sensitive topics that make people uncomfortable, right? So I want to start just by having us set a few what we call community agreements or norms to make sure that we have a space that feels safe for conversation and exploration. And these are all things we're willing to honor for the duration of this session, okay? And so we have a list here. Normally we sort of go back and forth, have people suggest other additions to these agreements. I don't think we really have time for that with the number of people we have. So hopefully this is a good list. The first one is to speak from the I perspective, right? Avoid speaking for others by using we, us, them, they, right? It's just, you're going to be talking about your experience. I'm going to be talking about my experience. So let's use the I. Second one is to listen actively, right? We're listening here to try to understand, not to try to respond. It's not a debate, right? Sometimes I think we get tempted to begin thinking about what we want to say in response to somebody instead of giving 100% of our focus to the speaker. So let's make sure we're listening 100%. Next one is to step up or step back. So if you're somebody who usually speaks up often, or you often find yourself talking more than other people, challenge yourself to lean into listening and opening up space for others. And on the other hand, if you're somebody that usually doesn't talk as much in groups, and you do a lot of your thinking and processing in your own head, know that we would love to hear your contributions. And I hope you'll challenge yourself to bring your voice forward in this conversation. The next one is to respect silence. Nobody should feel forced to fill silence, right? Silence is an indication that people are thinking and processing, and so that's totally fine. The next one is to share, even if you don't have the right words. We're going to be talking about topics that people are uncomfortable talking about. You don't know what the right word is to say, but try to suspend your judgment, allow others to be unpolished in their speaking. If you're unsure of what somebody means, then ask them for clarification. Right? Next one is to uphold confidentiality. The candor of others is a gift, and we should treat it as such, right? So we should assume that the personal identities, experiences, and perspectives that people are sharing in this space this evening are confidential unless you're given permission to use them. Now, I'll say that with a little asterisk that we have several working documents to work on these topics. So those are going to end up being public documents. So everybody, in your group that's adding to this document, make sure that you agree on what these are. They're not public yet, but we're planning on making them public after this meeting. The last one is to lean into discomfort, right? All the learning we ever do happens on the edge of our comfort zones. So push yourself to be open to new ideas and experiences, even if they initially seem uncomfortable to you. Okay, and if you have others, when you get into your breakout room, you could certainly, amongst you, come up with other agreements that you want to have. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan Schrader, and we'll let Jordan introduce herself and then go for it.
Thanks, Ajit. My name is Jordan Schrader. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Georgia Tech. I work with Gregory Sawicki in the Power Lab. And I'm ready to talk today about systemic racism in academia. So systemic racism in the US can look like police brutality. It can look like medical racism, or like voter suppression, or predatory lending and housing discrimination. It may look like educational inequality or environmental racism. It looks like mass incarceration and for-profit prison systems. It can look like gentrification, and it looks like the racial wage gap. It looks like so many other things as well. You may be asking yourselves, why is this slide titled Understanding Systemic Racism in Academia, when none of these points have directly addressed academia, STEM, or science? Understanding systemic racism in academia starts with recognizing that, like every other system in the United States, it is rooted in racial capitalism and white supremacy. Next slide, please. The same ideologies that uphold what I just mentioned are reflected in academia and manifest in things like bias and standardized testing. So studies show that entrance exams like the GRE do not correlate with student success, but we do know that they act as barriers for entry. So why do they still exist? These ideologies can be seen in nepotism within the hiring process. So we all know that academia and academic positions and hiring for these positions is heavily based on word of mouth and who you know. So this inherently excludes underrepresented minorities based on who is in positions of power. There's a lack of visible role models in these positions of power. Visibility doesn't just look like photo ops of Black and other underrepresented grad students for websites and recruitment purposes. Visibility looks like Black scientists in positions of power and prestige. At institutions, these positions can be tenured positions, endowed chairs, and committees with actual power and agency to make change. In professional societies like ASB, these positions look like executive board members, fellows, and awardees. These ideologies manifest in poor recruitment and retention of underrepresented minorities, and in financial instability of grad students. They can be seen in skewed ratings for underrepresented professors. These ideologies manifest more broadly through things like lack of institutional support, but also can be seen more specifically through things like lack of diverse subjects, a diverse subject pool in most biomechanics studies. Academia's roots in racial capitalism and white supremacy, again, like all systems in the US, also enables misogyny, queerphobia, xenophobia, racism, ableism, and other forms of hate-based ideologies that often intersect and contribute to nuanced oppression. This means it's not enough to even just consider systemic racism in STEM. We need to continue to think about how, for example, racism and misogyny intersect, or racism and ableism may intersect. Working towards solutions for systemic barriers in STEM without at least recognizing the scope of the problem is like putting duct tape on a crumbling foundation. Next slide, please. With the backdrop of a global pandemic that disproportionately has impacted Black and Indigenous people of color, as well as other non-Black people of color, recent police brutality has received a lot of national attention. This national attention has sparked conversations in STEM, like Shut Down STEM, where scientists at all levels participated in a day of shutting down STEM to learn more about anti-Blackness and addressing racial inequalities. For many, this was a day to learn more about continued violence of anti-Blackness and how it manifests in different systems in the United States. For some, this recent attention may have been an awakening to problems in STEM. Through things like the Black in the Ivory hashtag, where Black scientists from all levels shared stories about their experiences in STEM. If you haven't seen this, I encourage you to check it out on Twitter. For many Black scientists, neither the violent murders of Black men and women, national attention on the Black Lives Matter movement, or the attention on Black experiences specifically in STEM came as a surprise, as these are often things we are forced to deal with time and time again. As members of ASB and the broader scientific community work towards creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive STEM environment, it's imperative to recognize the scope and depth of these problems. As a society, we need to challenge ourselves to think critically about systemic racism in STEM. This doesn't happen by being passive. In fact, it takes time and energy and a necessary level of discomfort for those who benefit most from these systems. As scientists and engineers, we're trained to think critically and solve difficult problems. As I hope I've made it clear, systemic racism is a complex problem. Thinking critically involves reading literature, ongoing conversations that you revisit over and over again, and continued education. It involves amplifying voices of those who have dedicated their mostly uncompensated time and energy to this issue. It involves learning what has worked and what hasn't worked and building upon that. These are all things that we as biomechanists do in the research process. And we need to prioritize thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this manner. Next slide, please. Dismantling oppressive structures takes continued education and action. It takes collective effort from all of those who are involved in the system. All too often, the burden of diversity, equity, and inclusion work falls on the shoulders of underrepresented minorities. I cannot stress enough that shouldering this burden should not and cannot only be on underrepresented minorities and our allies. Even if individuals and institutions don't consider themselves as actively contributing to oppressive systems, you're benefiting from them and acting as gatekeepers. If you're in a position of power, any position of power, and not working to at least understand the problems, you're upholding these systems and gatekeeping whether you think you are or not. Dismantling these systems isn't charity work, it isn't resume building, it isn't for increasing your chances of getting a grant or feel-good moments. It's necessary for the advancement of good science. Addressing oppression involves continued education to understand systemic barriers. It involves collective action items that the larger STEM community can and should partake in. It also involves overcoming obstacles to these action items so we can actually implement them on small and large scales. Next slide, please. The goal of this meeting is to discuss, brainstorm, and analyze what ASB members at each stage can do to implement change in academia and in science. This involves brainstorming through the lens of understanding privilege and power, whether it's inherent or comes with the positions we are in or opportunities that we are granted. It involves understanding that change requires individual action and continued education, but it also involves understanding and advocating for larger institutional and structural changes. A large chunk of the remainder of this meeting, as Ajit and Robin touched on, is breakout rooms, and we want to encourage interactions and conversations on broad experiences, thoughts, and solutions. We would like you to think about systemic barriers in the context of them being deeply rooted issues, while considering individual and collective actions that can help dismantle these barriers. It's our intention for these breakout sessions to spark continued conversation and actions beyond this meeting. We hope that these conversations, questions, and talking points will not stop at this session. We also understand that we can't possibly address everything that is relevant to this overall conversation, or even a single specific barrier in this meeting, so please don't be intimidated in the brainstorming sessions. The idea is to spark and continue these conversations. We've created a Slack channel that members can use to continue conversation, to share resources, and hopefully share success stories in implementing action items to break down systemic barriers in STEM at their universities. So be on the lookout in the near future for an invitation to the Slack channel. We hope that you all will join and contribute. Next slide, please. So the remainder of this meeting will consist of 2 20-minute breakout sections. In the first session, we would like you to discuss and take notes in a Google document your specific assigned systemic barrier that you all chose when completing the survey to attend this event, and as well as systems that uphold that barrier. After session 1, we'll reconvene briefly in the main room before we go to session 2. In session 2, you'll be in the same breakout group as session 1. And we would like everyone to discuss and focus on action items, obstacles that get in the way of implementing these action items, and then solutions of how to overcome those obstacles. Again, with the lens of like thinking about what people can do at different levels, all members of ASB. There's going to be an open floor session at the end of the meeting where we will answer questions and hopefully discuss highlights of some of the breakout rooms. Due to the size of this meeting, we ask that if you have questions for this section, or if there's something in particular that comes up in your breakout section that you'd like to broadcast in the open floor, we ask that you submit it through a Google form, which we will throw in the chat. This can be anonymous, or you can put your name in this. But we would like questions and comments for the open floor to be submitted through this so that we can consolidate and address as many of them as possible later on in the open floor section. Again, in the chat, we'll put this link for the form, and then we're also going to put a link for a read-only parent Google Doc. So this is the parent Google Doc. We would like everyone to open this up, and then once and briefly when we go out into our breakout sessions, please click on your respective topic in the parent Google Doc, and this will bring you to a document that you should be able to have access to edit. There are more than one breakout group for some sections just because of the number of people that responded. So pay attention to the title of your breakout room, and that will tell you in the Google Doc where to brainstorm. As Aji and Robin mentioned, these breakout sessions won't be recorded, but we really want to use them as a way to hear a lot of different voices in ASB and sort of consolidate them into a big brainstorming session, which we will put out after the meeting and hopefully be communicating through Slack channel to follow up on these conversations. Again, I just want to reiterate that these issues are complicated, so please try to think of, when we're talking about brainstorming solutions, try to think of them in the lens of understanding the scope of the problem, but also understand that we are having 2 short breakout sessions, so the intention is not to solve systemic racism, but it is to spark and continue conversations. So I look forward to speaking with some of you and look forward to some of the open floor questions later on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Jordan, for that. Great introduction to this. So the first breakout session, what we're going to do is we're going to have you go into your breakout room and then talk about the barriers themselves. Now, many of us are engineers and we're all action-oriented people. So try to hold off on coming up with solutions until you've really talked through the barrier. So we want you to discuss the barrier in the room that you're in. Think holistically about what all are holding it up, not just the most obvious, but maybe other things that are holding it up, and then brainstorm action items to dismantle that barrier if you get to that. And then in the second breakout, we're going to be totally focused on action items to dismantle the barrier, and then the other challenges that may crop up in trying to dismantle the barrier. So I did share this link in the chat, and that has these instructions about what we're going to do in breakout session number 1. And then below that, it has these links, right? So if you click on the link for your room, maybe don't do it yet, wait till you see what room you're in. Once you click on that, it'll be a working document that people can add to. And with that, Robin, maybe we're ready.
We're gonna hope for the best. So I want to let you all know that I did my best to put you in the rooms that you requested. For some who registered late, you may not be in that specific room. Hopefully you can still have a great conversation. So I'm gonna open the rooms and you should just have to accept it and you'll go to your room. And then I'll send out about a 2-minute warning when I'm gonna pull everybody back into the main room. Okay. Have fun. Welcome back. It's gradually happening.
So far, so good. Our transition was seamless, Robin. So that.
Oh, good. I'm learning so much about Zoom right now. I have to be honest.
Like learning on the job, right?
Trial by fire. That's how we're running this with this many breakout rooms. It's been interesting. And
you're doing so well.
Oh, well, thank you. For those that didn't get in the room they wanted, I hope it was still a good conversation. So, and hopefully we'll get everybody.
I don't remember, so that's helpful, right? I was just assuming I did.
Yeah, I was the same. I'm like, I'm waiting for someone to tell me what topic I picked.
Most everybody did. The challenge I'm learning with Zoom is if you don't log in with the exact same email address that I put in the CSV file, then it doesn't assign you, and so then I have to just manually assign people to rooms. So hopefully good conversations were had.
Was that really 20 minutes?
It was 17.
Okay.
Yeah, we only got
like
through,
really fast.
Yeah, Robin, we only got through 3 of 6.
Oh, that's not good. I took 3 minutes away because we were behind. So, and one of the things that we can decide as a group, right, this is, for better or worse, I'm running this on my university account because it was easier. And so there is no specific need to end at a given time. So if good conversations are happening, then we can always go back into breakout rooms. Even after the next set, we can bring everybody back together and then go back in for more discussions as people want. Have we got, it's so hard to know if everybody's back. I assume everyone's back.
Yeah, just assume we're all back because there's 154 now.
All right, that's kind of the number I went with. Sounds right. But I'm waiting for like Ajit to tell me he's back because he's the one supposed to be talking.
I'm back.
Right now. Because this was you and Jordan's job. I was just bringing people in and out.
Oh, right. So what we had originally planned was now right in the middle here, before we go back to the breakout rooms, was to just ask open floor, did anybody have anything? Obviously, you know, your people are writing things in the documents, I think, which is great, and hopefully having good conversations. Were there any important points that people thought are important to share with everybody about your discussion? Watching the chat now. Because if not, and if people are just raring to go back into the breakout rooms, we can go right back into the breakout rooms.
We can. We're getting some thumbs up for breakout rooms. Okay, does everybody know how to use the little responses in your participant window, because if people want to go back, just raise your hand over there or thumbs up me or something, and I will just start that again. Okay.
Yeah, let's just
Not
put it
everybody's
back to
responding,
breakout.
but we're going to do that, and we're moving on to kind of the next set of questions, or finish up on what you were talking about before. And I will give you a full 20 minutes this time instead of 18, and then we'll come back again and chat. So, ready? Go. There comes everybody. Kind of fun to watch.
Good job, Robin.
I feel like a switchboard operator. It's kind of fun, I gotta say.
You get to plug things in with your hands.
Pretty much. It feels a little like the old school switchboard where somebody comes in and I'm like, did you get knocked off? Whatever. Because people's internet will go down. It's kind of fun.
You're just enjoying having the power of our 150 souls.
I know.
That could be a good thing or not a good thing. We'll see. Hopefully that felt a little better in terms of time. Ajit and I were texting back and forth. I'm like, I'm going to give people more time because I was sitting in a room by myself, so time is quickly probably. So I will turn it back over to Ajit and Jordan to kind of circle back on the conversations.
All right. Again, I guess we felt like we were just having a good conversation. We got cut off and we made it through like nowhere near all of the parts that we wanted to try to get through. So, but I guess we wanted to make sure that we gave time, you know, we've sort of focused on these specific list of systemic barriers for the first hour and 20 minutes. But we wanted to make sure there was plenty of time if people have other topics or questions or concerns or anything like that that they want to bring up. So now, I don't know, Jordan, did you have a chance to look at the responses at all? If anybody posted anything?
It looks like there's 2 questions. So one is there any national database for financial support of college undergrads/graduates, either in STEM or outside of FAFSA? So I don't know if...
Whoever asked that question, do you want to expand upon your question?
Sure. So when I came into college, the only resources that I was aware of were through FAFSA. And in my particular case, my parents' financial status was very, let's say, volatile. And they didn't have their taxes done, which meant that I could not apply for FAFSA, which meant that when I went to undergrad, I did not have any financial support for the first year until they got their taxes done. And there was nowhere to look outside of the university if you knew the right people. So I kind of ran around the campus quite a bit trying to find any financial support, and I don't imagine that it's any easier for anyone else unless they're connected to the right people.
So basically, is there a national database of sort of ways to get financial support?
Yes, if there's any, I don't know if there's any education funding that's provided through the government, or if there is, I mean, I navigated at the university level and that just took a while, but it would be significantly easier if there was just like a place that you could go and say, hey, this is a place where you can find either federal or state grants that might apply to you.
I mean, this is a question for anybody on the call. So if anybody is aware of stuff, please jump in or type it in the chat.
I'd like to kind of expand it a little bit. And our group was a first generation group. And one of the main things we found was basically not knowing who to talk to for information. And that's what you're talking about in the financial sense, but we're just kind of at sea because there's nobody in their family that could help guide them. And it was hard to find the resources.
Yeah. And I think it's wildly variable also in high schools, like in theory, right? The college counselor is the one who's supposed to be able to know this information. They're just one person and maybe they're completely overwhelmed, or maybe the school doesn't even really have the funding to have a full-time college counselor also. But yeah, I guess short answer is I'm not aware of any national database. That seems like it would be a very helpful thing. Now I do know that I'll just speak for Ohio State, the financial aid office there will talk to anybody, not just current students, but people who are thinking about applying. If I was, thinking about applying whether to graduate school, professional school, undergrad, I could contact them and say, I don't have any idea if I could even afford this. Like that's what they do, is to provide that kind of counseling. That's just one university really talking about things specific to that university.
Yeah. Virginia Tech is the same way in that sense, and I think the Ohio State is a land grant as well, is it not?
It is.
So it's just, I don't know how different that is between your land grant institutions versus private. So if anybody's at a private and has that information, please share it. But yeah, financial aid office would be where I would send people. The other thing that I have done, depending on the group or the program that they're interested in, is I've just connected them to the pre-college people within that program. But again, that's institution specific, because our pre-college person in the College of Engineering has a lot of that information. Unfortunately, I don't think it's done on a national level that I know of. Does anybody else know of anything?
One thing that we may want to consider is there is the UNCF and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations combined, and generally have a lot of undergraduate scholarships, but they also have a lot of graduate scholarships, fellowships, and that what tends to happen is a lot of entities will give control, if you will, over their application process to the Thurgood Marshall and UNCF and Bill and Melinda Gates, and they have a single portal, if you will, that's going to start to funnel some funding to people. And like I said, if you first pull it up, there's a lot of undergraduate things, which is also very helpful, but there are some graduate funding opportunities there as well. I'll see if I can find the link and put that in the chat.
Great, thanks, Matt.
It looks like there's another question related to brainstorming individual ways to make an impact, not just institutional changes, but in our classes, lab groups, etc. So I know that in my group, we were talking about structural racism, and something that came up was a lack of consequences or a system to genuinely have retaliation for those that are being racist or sexist and things like that. So we did talk about individually trying to speak up and not being bystanders, as well as trying to confide in peers and other faculty members to advocate for you if you're in one of those situations. But the conversation did go back to like power structures in academia. So even if there was a suggestion for maybe junior faculty to stand up to the more senior faculty, but then a point was made that these people are on review boards for tenure. So I think we kind of went back to more like structural things and more like as an institution, even beyond the institution. Kayla, I don't remember your last name, from the University of Delaware brought up like having attacking or addressing it on like the higher funding level. So we talked about in my group maybe having NIH setting some standards for or some sort of scoring system about, you know, a more holistic, instead of just research dollars and research money. So considering mentorship and teaching and other things like that, that would help everyone, but especially help underrepresented students. And then saying, like, if you're not above this level, you don't get to apply for these grants. And then if you are below the level, here are ways that you can improve. So it's not necessarily that people are overtly doing things, but they may not know what they're doing, or they may not be receptive to feedback from students or younger faculty or other people when there's not true, it doesn't seem like, at least in our group, we didn't think there was true consequences for these types of actions. So we did talk about individual, we did bring it back to the bigger scope of trying to like think about structural change.
I just want everybody to know that people are putting in some really good resources within the chat. So make sure you're taking a look at that as well. I will do my best at the end to save the chat so that we'll have those resources as well for everyone. That's a great point, Jordan, and would love to continue that conversation if people have other thoughts. I mean, I know the NIH has put forward some insights, especially as it's related to sexual harassment and reporting structures. So I think some of our national or funding bodies are looking in that direction. How quickly that happens and exactly what that process looks like, I think is a tough process to figure out. But a good idea if we can find ways to do it. I mean, even at our individual institution level, figuring out how to include mentorship a little bit more in even the promotion and tenure process would help to provide at least some level of consequence to poor behavior. Let's put it that way.
I think another thing that's probably worth everybody doing at your own institution is figuring out, are there anonymous reporting methods? I know that at Ohio State, we do have this bias assessment reporting tool, so I don't know, something like that. But it's an anonymous thing, right? And if you might think, well, okay, it's just going off into nowhere, and it might be. Even if that's true, there is something a little bit, I don't know, takes a weight off my shoulders to report something like, I reported, I've done something, you know? But hopefully those things add up if more and more people do it. And then they'll start, you know, whoever is reading that, whether it's the, you know, the Office of Title IX or whatever it is, you know, seeing that, gosh, there are a lot of comments coming in. And the other thing, of course, is making sure that everybody knows that it's not just the responsibility of the person who was attacked, who the microaggression was directed towards, to report that. It's everybody's job, right? Because if everybody in the class heard what that professor said and they all report it, that is a huge, that cannot be ignored.
Yeah, the other thing, resource from an institution perspective, again, this may be institution specific, but I know, again, I can only speak to Virginia Tech at this point. The Office of the Ombudsman is another place where we have anonymous report that allows for that report, and then the action can be discussed. Now, what I'll say is, if they begin to get a lot of reports within a department or for a specific faculty member, those start to get fed back to the college. They start to get fed back to the department head, right? So while, again, they seem anonymous and they may seem like they go off into nowhere sometimes, at good institutions that are having a good Title IX office, those things do get looked at. So, you know, knowing that it is important, no matter what stage in your career you are, to report those, I think is important to know that there are ways to do that do provide a little bit of cover. Right? You don't have to walk down the hall and say it to the faculty themselves.
Yeah, I would just want to add that, specifically talking about the ombuds, people, I know of people who have had really bad experiences trying to report through that. And then there's also the issue of keeping a level of anonymity when there's not that many underrepresented students. So I would say if we're talking about individual actions and people advocating, really trying to hear people out when they're expressing things that have happened and trying to respect that level of anonymity as much as possible, knowing that there is a power structure and a power dynamic within academia.
Absolutely. And I don't know about Ohio State. For us, there is also an anonymous version online that can be submitted that there's no connection to. So it depends on whether you want to have that conversation. And I saw Cecile.
Actually, that was exactly what I was going to point out. I'm sorry, your name is so small here. Jordan was pointing out, I was trying to read it. When there's only 2 women in our department, if a woman says this thing happened, well, it's impossible for us to hide. So it makes it, this anonymous reporting doesn't help. What would help is if a male colleague who heard it made the complaint.
Absolutely.
And he can do it anonymously if he wants to, but that would really help.
I think our advocates and allies are incredibly important.
And I think that's what more of my colleagues need to learn to do. If you found it offensive, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you report it?
Great point.
So there's another question. How do you get university presidents and provosts to care about implementing change? It seems as if financial incentives make structural changes are all that matters up top. Do people have thoughts on that?
I just want to add that, it's kind of related to the last one too, but what can we do to prevent these things from happening in the first place? You know, it comes from the top, the president and the environment and the culture and what's acceptable or not. And I think what you were getting at perhaps is that, you know, changing the culture or calling out being important, those kinds of things. But how do we prevent it in the first place? But let's go back to that, the university question too.
One thing universities don't like is bad press. So that's one way to go about that. But I do think, and the flip side is that they like good press. So I think they like to be seen as being proactive and trying to affect change and respond. And as you've seen with lots of the recent statements over the past month or months, they like to be seen as being proactive in some of these situations. So in some cases, I think that can work to our advantage when done properly.
Great point.
I worry sometimes that a related challenge, though, is that there can be even strong policy at an institution, but if it is not adopted at the level of the voting faculty in the department, that mismatch can be really damaging because you can be doing everything according to the policy, but when they go and they vote, they're going to vote how they vote. And so thinking about how to have it not just be top down, but to make that culture change at every level is, I think, really difficult, but absolutely essential. And I don't have a good solution. I wish I did.
I can tell you one thing that, some of you maybe know, our president from Ohio State, he left and he's going to become the chancellor of University of California now. And I happened to have the, luck of being in a meeting with him right before he left. And he said something that we all were really disappointed with, but maybe it's a little cold water that we need to hear, is he said, you've got to be excellent in your world. Do everything you can to be excellent in your world so that you get the credibility, so that you get the ability to be in the room where it happens, I guess, right? Like so that you can then, when they're having that vote, you're there now because you've been putting the work in your sort of other parts of your job. And all of us in the room, this was the university diversity committee, we were all like, oh my gosh, come on, that's crap, you know? Like, you should be doing the right thing because it's the right thing. But maybe it's just, if you make yourself, this is more to faculty, I guess, you know, you get yourself in that room, then you have the ability to have that voice.
It's tough to hear, but it's true. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sylvia.
I was just going to say, I echo what everybody's saying. One thing I found myself pointing out, kind of in conversations that are kind of with maybe upper administration or about maybe more at leadership levels, but ones that have major impact on the conversations we're having, is pointing out, like, oftentimes like if there's sort of a decision to be made where the issue of diversity and inclusion is one that needs to be talked about, the answer to like the kind of question is often, in order to do whatever it is that needs to be done that properly addresses the issues of diversity and inclusion, is usually the harder way to do something. It's not the way that our institutions are formed or like designed to do. For example, how do we hire leadership? We hire it from within. So if you're going to, and so if all of the people, all of the faculty that we've been hiring look the same, then that means our leadership are going to look the same. What's harder to do is conduct searches for leadership that are out external or that bring in other types of people. It's just a minor example where the harder thing to do is also the right thing to do if you, for example, want a diverse pool of people to be your leaders. But in normally institutions, people want to do the easier thing. So I think that the simple fact of pointing out, okay, you're talking about what's the right thing versus the easier thing. And even if you point that out, sometimes I think that can be jarring enough to people to have them realize, okay, what I'm going for is the easier thing, not the right thing. And sometimes I think a lot of people can, maybe their impressions can be shifted, but just based on realizing that, because sometimes we don't realize that.
Thank you for sharing that, Sylvia. That was great. And
yeah,
often the harder thing to do.
I feel like that kind of like touches on the implementation obstacles. So if the action item is the right thing to do, but then when you go to do it, you get pushed back. Oh, we can't do it because of this. We can't do it because of this. We can't do it because of this. Then it's not really that it can't be done. It's that people don't want to take the step to change things or to make dramatic and structural changes. But if we don't do that, then the solutions aren't going to happen.
I'd like to point something out as an administrator in the room, right, about higher ed, is like the president of a university actually exerts very little direct control over faculty, right? So I have a college with, and I'm not the president, I'm the dean, but still I can't tell faculty anything to do, right? They control the curriculum, they control the syllabus, they control the rank and tenure processes. There are meetings I can't even go to. And so there's clearly things I can do to help with the culture and the climate, and I can help train the leaders that are going to ultimately, hopefully be, enforcing policies and helping support the right people. But ultimately in a university setting, the faculty govern themselves, so you can't not address the faculty, right? I mean, it's like we all have to do it because the president, the provost, the dean, the chair, they each only have limited roles and they can only force so much to happen. So that's disappointing, right? But that's why, like in industry, if I was a CEO, I could make everybody do it because I could fire them if they didn't. But 80% of my faculty have job security for life. So that gives me many less levers that I can exert to get them to behave nicely to one another. And so, tenure is lovely for some things, but it causes problems in other ways. And so we're a complicated distributed system, right? And so affecting change in that is different than in a hierarchical system like the military or a corporation.
So do you think we should push back against tenure as a process?
Is anybody recording this? Yes.
Yes, it's actually being recorded, so take that into account.
Anybody else who's willing to comment, I'd be happy to listen. But there are benefits and drawbacks to it, right? I think that's the reality that, you know, for academic freedom, it's really important, and yet there are some behaviors that are very difficult to address because of the way tenure is done.
So do you think we should make tenure not be fully tenure? Or like
you're trying to put her in a corner right now. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, I feel like this, I've heard this very issue multiple times, and I think it's a really important one in terms of thinking about institutional change. I think that the one that you bring up, Michelle, is kind of like the crux of the issue almost.
So isn't there a need to create cultural change?
Yeah.
And so many other, I mean, that's going to take participation, and it's going to be on us. And this is a community. That's pretty fundamental. So I think if we all participate in some way and really speak up and find our voice, and maybe it's a one-on-one conversation, and over time you can make a difference. But I think it's going to be on all of us to make that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think to follow on what Jill said, it has to be top down and bottom up at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. You need the right leaders to make reporting possible, to hold people accountable, to be willing to talk to somebody, even if they have tenure, and put them on notice that their behavior is not okay. And yet you need a lot more numbers of people doing that from the bottom up too, to actually change the system, which is why it's great that we've got 150 people here talking about this right now. But now we all have to go back and gain other advocates in our departments and programs and institutions, right? And get them all working together.
And that's the flip side of tenure too, in a good way, is that if you do have it, you should use it to be the voice that can be louder, because then you're no longer at that same level of risk from the other people in the room. So if you do have it, you can't be shy. you need to take advantage of the gift that you earned, but that you have, to help make that change and not just sit there and observe it.
What about changes to the tenure, like how tenure is granted?
Yeah, right. I had a similar question. Like I don't know a lot about the specific process, but I'm curious if there are any universities that when they grant tenure, that also comes with like revocable conditions. Like if you engage in these certain, like very specific conduct, like if your tenure can, like, are there any universities where it is not completely irrevocable, and what are those conditions, and how difficult is it to change those conditions?
So I could maybe comment on that, because I didn't think it was possible until we've had one. It wasn't a huge offense, but it was strong enough that, and it's an ugly process, and it's not finished, nowhere close. But it can happen. It can happen. So, I don't know if it's because in Canada, all professors are unionized too, mostly, so it may make a difference there, maybe a bit. But I was surprised, and I was happy actually that it did happen in this case. But yeah, if you mess up bad enough, it will happen.
Well, that makes me think, how do we define what's bad enough? Like if that precedent exists, what bars universities from, if the claim is for wanting diversity, inclusion, and equity, what stops universities from adding these offenses to that list of like bad enough to be able to revoke tenure? And what is, like, I mean, I might be just being too idyllic here, but what would that look like if that list exists? Then in theory, things can be added to that list, and that would be a huge push for accountability.
I know it was on those grounds that it was, in other words, infringing on the rules of the university, the rules of conduct. And I don't know all the specifics, as I said, and it's a very complicated file and stuff, but it was based on that.
You know, I think this goes back to what Michelle was bringing forward before, which is because of how university governance is set up, the faculty make those rules in their faculty handbook. Typically, it is done by the faculty senate. And so it depends on who is sitting in that space at the time when those sets of decisions are made. Most of the time they're fairly vague, and it is not a pleasant process to bring someone up in that through that process, and usually ends up in a lawsuit in some way, shape, or form. So it's a tough balance to make between the two of them, and I agree. There are ways through university governance to change those.
Yeah.
It's just not fast to change them. We've talked about, you know, the academy is a big ship. It turns really slowly, unfortunately, and it has to go through layers and layers of faculty approval, which means depending on who the faculty are in that room, what they're willing to approve and what they're not willing to approve.
But that is a place where the top down can help change the culture, in that department heads can be trained to understand what the process is and that there is a process. Because I have sat in on a department head, like, you know, retreat where there was, you know, you do those activities where it's like a hypothetical scenario and you talk about how you would handle it. And there was exactly this kind of a scenario, and no one in the room even knew. It was like, well, let him wait till he retires, or, you know, have a conversation about his legacy and that he doesn't want his legacy to be like this. And I was like, no, this is what? No. Not this, no, you know. But then there was sort of a discussion that they didn't know that there was an alternative process. And that seems like if there is an institutional mechanism, that needs to be very, very clear proactively, not just when there's a problem, because they might not even go looking for that solution.
So I'm just going to bring a few of the questions forward that I'm seeing come up in the chat. So there was a question that was, are professors made to sign a similar code of conduct to what the students sign for each semester in class? So I will put that out there for my colleagues to discuss.
I think it depends on the institution, right? I don't think every institution even has something that students sign at the beginning of every class. Most have a student code of conduct, but faculty rarely have something very similar that I know of. There may be examples that are different than my experience, but I don't know of, there's as Robin pointed out, there's usually a faculty manual that has some sort of definitions of appropriate conduct, but often what it really defines is absolutely egregious, inappropriate conduct, right? Stuff that's like literally illegal, essentially, is what it defines. And there's not a lot of like kind of bad or bad to groups of people, and yet we would still not tolerate it. There's usually not a whole lot of that.
Anybody else with?
I feel like also, even if it, you know, if it takes a certain level of something, or if it takes a long process to get someone removed, there's things that still can be done in the meantime, like whether that's by colleagues, like talking to them, or, you know, at my school, we've had conversations with incoming students like, hey, I know you're considering this lab, but here's like, you know, some things that have happened, or like with underrepresented students and things like that. So I feel like there's consequences that the like community, even if it's not coming from higher up, can do to prevent this from happening over and over again, or at least to prevent these faculty from continuing to recruit students or continuing to have power, like be in positions of power over young scientists.
That's basically what happened in our case initially. So privileges started to get removed, and then more and more it got more and more restrictive. It said, listen, and suddenly, you know, a line was put. It said, listen, if you continue and persist, we will have no choice but to terminate you. And it just didn't stop. So, but yeah, privileges can be, and a dean can make this person's life more difficult. You know, by not letting him pick classes, by assigning him stuff that's annoying. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here, but you can make somebody's life more difficult.
But all of these are for major offenses, like,
yeah,
you know, Michelle was talking about being illegal or whatever, and
well, it wasn't criminal.
all the other, but what I'm saying is that we need to address the microaggressions and the everyday life things that happen, and just the culture that is there that sort of just eats away.
Yeah, to James' question, it looks like from people's responses, it's happening slowly. And I think that's something where I was thinking as we were talking about trying to remove somebody, this is the place where in considerations for promotion is really where there's a lot more ability to act and make sure that people that we value the things we value, right? We were talking about that in our group, talking about admissions. We should value what we value, you know, and same thing for hiring, same thing for promotion, right? If we do that, then I think that can make a really perceptible change relatively quickly.
Yeah. Just to sort of expand on that idea, we talked about this a little bit in our group about expanding cultural awareness, but you know, we evaluate for the students in the audience. Generally, we're as faculty evaluated on scholarship, teaching, and service. Typically is very heavily weighted towards scholarship, where you can count things like papers, publications, citations, H-index, indices, whatever. But you know, we could come up with creative ways to evaluate what are people doing for diversity and inclusion. And I think a lot of people have made comments about conversations happening in their department. So I think a lot of the discussion for the last 10 minutes has been on the back end where, you know, you want to get rid of the problem. But I think what we want to do is figure out how to facilitate a solution so that people coming up are really affecting change. And if they are internally nominated to be deans and, you know, provosts and presidents, that you already have sort of, you know, sort of, I don't know, good meat in the stew in some way, where it's, you know, it's going to turn out good because you have good ingredients. So I think that's what I would really like to see. And, you know, we're having these conversations, and I think other people are. So I think that's promising.
Yeah, I think including things like mentoring and teaching also inherently cover a lot of those same things instead of just umbrella diversity and inclusion. Because I feel like, at least from my perspective, there's not a lot of rewards for being a good mentor. And I think that like being a good mentor obviously impacts all students, but I think it can really impact underrepresented students in a good or bad ways, depending on who your mentor is.
So I don't want to stop the conversation. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is almost 8 o'clock. I am absolutely happy to continue the conversation. I'm willing to stay on as long as people want to keep chatting. I do want to let everybody know that we will be following up and continuing these conversations throughout the year, just to continue to engage. Please feel free to stay around and continue the conversation. If you have to leave, we completely understand, and want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us, you know, this evening with everything going on. It was 2 hours that you could have been doing something else. So we appreciate you coming and having these conversations and continuing to help both ASB expand and grow in this space, but also, you know, think about how we change the spaces and places in which we live and work. So I want to thank you for that. And whoever was willing and able to stay, please feel free to continue the conversation. But I just wanted to thank everybody for coming if you have to take off.
I like, somebody had, it's flying up on the chat because of all the thank yous, and we appreciate the thank yous. I'm trying to find it though. This idea about some place for P&T actually asking for letters from mentees or from graduate students or things like that. Like, it's so common in the corporate world, at least, to have these 360 reviews. Why are we not doing any 360 reviews for faculty? Like that.
We don't get those until leadership, Audrey. And then they make you do them all the time, it feels like. But yeah, no, I think it wasn't Kate, it was Stacy, I think, Ringlab brought up that idea as well. Or at least bringing up the idea that even for us as external reviewers, bringing forward some of the diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We have this power to suggest, and I think that's, you've got an audience that's going to listen. I'm always impressed when these small things, they're not small, but you just mention them and something happens, you know? So I think you have to see it. You have to think about it and see it. And I think that's been coming up a lot here too. I just want to thank the audience. Everybody was great. I think this has been really, really good. And before we all become not able to do another Zoom meeting, I don't know, I'm still good with Zoom. I think that this is something we can continue outside the meeting and not necessarily just once a year.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up, I feel like we're really focusing on like our institutions, but we're here for ASB, and what are we doing to promote diversity in ASB, because we're not there yet either. And like, we still need to make progress here, and we're here for that. So I kind of want to hear how ASB is planning on making changes, or ideas people have for making changes with ASB. And yeah.
Thank you for that.
Also, really quickly, I really liked Lindsay's point, and I wanted to piggyback off of that. If people want to also throw out ideas for engaging more students, especially students who wouldn't otherwise find their way into biomechanics.
We're at this odd transition between one of us and the other. So
I'm not in leadership at all, but I would really, really support the idea of virtual conferences from now on, because $50 or $20 or whatever the cost is so accessible for people, and undergrads and grad students. I can't afford to spend $2,000 to send my postdoc or my research staff to these things, but I can. If they want to participate in this, pay $50. That's so easy, and that's something I want to do. It just seems like accessibility is king here, and we should really work on that. And maybe it's not virtual, maybe it's in person, but finding a way to get more people involved who aren't involved right now.
Feeding into that, having the virtual posters frees up so much space. If we go back to in-person conferences, keeping posters virtual, I know I've been able to engage with so many more posters than I would have in a crowded conference hall. And I've been able to absorb that science better. And if I've wanted to reach out, I've been able to locate the person whose poster it is. But you kind of avoid that awkward dance that you do in person at a poster where you're trying to read it, but the person's standing right there and you're not quite sure what's going on. So I've got a lot more out of the posters with them being virtual. And if we do go back to an in-person conference, you can still have that personal interaction by maybe messaging through the Crowd Compass app or whatever and saying, could we talk some more? But you get more exposure to those posters, and also, you know, you're not necessarily in a huge conference hall all the time. And one other thing I wanted to bring up with that was the accessibility of in-person posters. Is standing by your poster for an hour or so doesn't seem like a big deal if you are a healthy individual, but if you have any kind of hidden illness, whether that is mental, physical, whatever, maybe not even hidden, standing by a poster for an hour can be really, really demanding. And I like the virtual aspect of it. So yeah, that.
Thank you.
Also, another thing that we talked about in our breakout sessions, building off of that, in terms of accessibility of just knowledge to everybody, is doing something kind of like National Biomechanics Day, but much more extensive than that, kind of building in the online education pieces that we've seen popularize, things like Khan Academy and Coursera, and just having lots of biomechanics material available to students, especially pre-college students like middle schoolers, high schoolers, and that way parents who want to get their kids more engaged with STEM but don't necessarily have the resources or the knowledge themselves to be able to teach their kids that material, they can basically go on, and if they're, fun videos or different, biomechanics activities that they can see online, then that'll be a good way also to get more diverse students hopefully involved in STEM activities.
That ties into a comment that now I forget who made much earlier in the discussion about finances, that National Biomechanics Day might be a good place to share some of that information to get students to college and then into biomechanics. To Lindsay's question as well, I think all of these points about the meeting are a main part of what ASB does, but there's also the efforts that we need to do for the membership throughout the year within ASB, and to have increased representation within our membership. So we do, and I don't want to take Robin or Ajit's plans because it involves them as well. But there are the ongoing things that we do with the travel support, and now we've extended that so that it also will pay for membership dues for a year for underrepresented members. But we'd like to continue, that's just one piece. We want to continue to grow. We're looking to partner with some other professional societies that are more geared towards underrepresented groups that are especially underrepresented within ASB, so that we can look for, mutual members that might not know about ASB and may want to come over and try a meeting. And these ideas about keeping these aspects of the virtual meeting that can be more widely available and publicly available after the meeting, I think is another way to kind of get that information out about what we do in ASB. But very interested in other ideas from the membership about what would be helpful and valuable as you work with students, or if you are a student.
I want to make sure Anna has a chance to speak because she raised her hand.
Thanks. I was basically going to echo Naomi's comments. She hit the nail on the head. But yeah, just in terms of changing the landscape of the university, we really do need to start younger, and the payoff's not going to be for 15 years, but starting definitely at like the elementary school age, and just showing showing people what it could look like to be a scientist and to be, in these fields, because a lot of people this is something we talked about in the group. Some people don't know what the expectations are. Like, what does being a researcher even look like? Like what would a researcher do as a job? And introducing those sort of career paths early on can make a big difference.
Yeah, and another thing that we talked about in our group was student engagement, and basically getting kids interested in science and biomechanics by linking it. Because like, I don't know if it's changed, but when I was a kid, science was like really nerdy, and there was a huge social stigma attached to that, which was a little bit discouraging to me. But linking it with things like sports, I think is a really good way to get students engaged, because I think if students become interested, then they can go and like explore a little bit more on their own and learn. But I think just like having a way to destigmatize science and make it more accessible to maybe like people who are athletes, that I think that would be a good way as well.
There was also a poster in the education session about teaching teachers, and then they had like a 2-week workshop for teachers to teach them about biomechanics, and then they brought in students to help make those teachers feel confident in being able to teach biomechanics. And I sort of got involved in educational research because an education student who was an emergency babysitter for one of my kids told me that she thought engineering was so hard it was for the boys. So absolutely, we need to get people in elementary school. We need to get them interested. But if we don't impact their teachers, it's going to be hard because there's all that bias against, you know, you're a girl, you can't do it, you know, you're under, you know, whatever, you misbehave, you can't, you know, you can't go into this field. So. So just getting teachers to incorporate it into their curriculum this is a really good time, at least in the United States, because they're changing all the science standards to include design, like, I mean, it's more engineering design process, but that can all fit into what we do in biomechanics, even if you're not an engineer.
Can we go to Maria? Is raising your hand?
Yes, hi. So one thing I noticed, I was not an ASB member before. Actually, I'm still not an ASB member, which is something that I wanted to bring up is when I applied for the membership, I needed 2 sponsors. And it took me a while to find somebody who was already a member. I think you guys have like a link to help people find sponsors, but this is the very first time I ever encountered something like that in any other student org or just organization that I've joined before does not require that. And so, you know, I did pay the student fee for this conference, and I've gotten a lot out of it. And I do think that, you know, the $50 was like, it's appropriate, right, for all the knowledge I'm getting. And definitely not as expensive as paying, again, like close to $1,000 to travel, to book a room, to buy food in those locations. But how can we streamline the membership process so that it's quicker, or I don't have to dig around my university and another department to see who might be a member?
So I can certainly answer it, and I want to be clear that I'm answering it in terms of what the intent is and recognizing that there may be an effect that you raise that is absolutely right, Maria, that we should re-examine it. But to just give you some of the context for it, it's in the bylaws, so it would require a membership vote to change. It is required to have 2 sponsors. The intent is to ensure that a couple things. One is that members are in fact involved in biomechanics in a way that is verified by people who are within the field. And as the field grows, that becomes perhaps more difficult because it's a larger, when it started, it was a very small group. And so, you know, I think that had exactly a concerning effect because it kept it small. As it gets larger, I hope that it's easier to find more and more people that are members. But that is the intent, because people do use this as a, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like somebody might be...
as a credential.
As a credential, thank you. That's the word that I'm looking for. Thanks, Cecile. That, you know, they are in a lawsuit, and they're using it as a credential to say that they are an expert in some way and they are part of the society that's endorsing them. And so we do need to be sure that there is an implicit endorsement, and that's part of what that application process is for. The other is to encourage people to find other people in the society. So by asking for 2 sponsors, we're trying to encourage people to find other people that are already in the society, in their institution, to encourage those connections and to be a part of the community rather than be more isolated. So those are parts of the intention of having that. I think there are things that certainly right now what happens is there are many people who approach me who don't have 2 sponsors, and then I help them make those connections. And so does the student rep, and we can certainly streamline that process for sure, to make that more transparent and accessible, because we don't want it to be a hurdle, but we do need there to be a criteria for being part of the society. So that's why that's there. But it's something that's come up a couple times, especially recently, that we want to revisit what that process is and make sure that people who are part of biomechanics can be part of the society. There are other professional societies that have a very similar thing that for several other professional societies that I'm a part of, where I needed that same kind of sponsorship. So it's not.
Maybe like a directory then, where we could just find the member. And I didn't click around further to see if you guys already have that, but that would have also been helpful.
Yep, that's a good idea, Maria. There is a directory, and I think what we could do, now I'm just brainstorming on the fly, is there may be a way to
we did have a very clear mention on the website next to that thing. We used to, I haven't looked at the most recent version of it, but it said, if you're having any trouble locating sponsors, please contact the membership chair. And maybe that part got removed, and so people think it's a requirement and don't know they can get help.
Lots of
places. Right. My hurdle was that I wanted to attend this conference, and I saw that student members had free registration, and so I believed that if I signed up to be a student member, that I could have access. But I'm still not a member because the process takes a while. So even though I paid the $20 to be the student member, I still had to pay the $50 to attend the conference. So like I did it too late in the game, which I didn't know would happen because other societies, they give you your membership on the spot. So like I also didn't know it would take a while to become a student member.
I'm gonna say something which maybe the organizers are already aware of, but I had undergraduate students who didn't get ASB membership in time to register. They registered, and where it said, "What is your ASB membership number?" They left it blank, and they could still register. So that was a thing that happened. I'm not sure if it was meant to happen or not, but they definitely got in that way.
Thank you for that.
I know Skylar has had her hand up for a long time.
Yeah.
So I want to get to Skylar, and then I want to maybe try to address Lindsay's question, which is I think the one that Jamie asked. The people are bumping up Jamie. So go ahead, Skylar.
Yeah, mine actually kind of has to do with what Lindsay said, like thinking of actionable items to support diversity and inclusion. I don't know if a lot of you know about this, but we do have ASB student subcommittees, and I was a part of a subcommittee for advocacy and dissemination in STEM. The main issue we were coming across is doing outreach events and things like that cost money and also time. And so I think if ASB could support some of these student subcommittees in a monetary fashion to do outreach events in their local committees, that could really be an actual thing to do. And also I know they're piloting student chapters of ASB on different campuses. Maybe we make it a requirement. If you want to have a student chapter, you have to have some form of outreach in the community. What that can be can differ by school, but I really think, as people have reiterated, seeing someone who looks like you or is a person of color saying, hey, STEM, biomechanics is a thing that you can do. And I know we also discussed maybe going back to like Teachers Matter, making a set of standardized, like just easy intro to biomechanics PowerPoints and putting them on like the teaching repository and making them available. So maybe I can't go and do a presentation in person because I have research, but I can give you this presentation to an elementary school teacher, a middle school teacher, a high school teacher, just to introduce the kids to biomechanics. So I think addressing accessibility, but also encouraging and supporting our student subcommittees to do outreach is really important.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that real quick. When we're talking about outreach and trying to encourage it, I think it's really important to talk about, I guess, culturally aware outreach. So I know that one of the barriers is culturally aware mentoring, but trying to apply that to everyone that's doing outreach and making sure that it's meaningful and that you're prepared, because I've seen firsthand and I've had to do damage control where in an outreach event, we're recruiting, trying to get people in STEM, and then the people who are volunteering are like showing microaggressions to the students. And it's like, this is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. And even if people have good intentions, that's not enough. You really need to come into outreach experiences, taking them seriously, and then taking like preparation seriously, so that we're not doing the opposite of what the outreach is for.
I just want to just say one thing about, you know, what Lindsay was asking about, like, what can we do as a society? And, you know, Matt mentioned in the chat, you know, a couple of things that we're doing, affinity groups, diversity travel awards, some things like that. But I think that we're just at the, I think that we would love to hear ideas. So please, everybody, you know, submit ideas for what you think might be a useful thing. Of course, and at this point, you know, everything can involve money. That's okay with me. I'll just ask for money. I can do that. But yeah, let's come up with ideas. I think that ASB, at some level, maybe, you know, is representative of all of our own institutions. And at the same time, we should do everything we can to try to make ASB itself more diverse and more of a leader, so that people can have that example to take back to their institutions.
So one of the things that came up in our committee was just that, like, basically everywhere, like every step along the way, there was a possibility for like a mentor to be helpful. And if there were several, like I had trouble, I had like no mentors in high school, but someone else in our group, like I made it to college and they had mentors, whereas someone else, they had mentors all throughout high school and then came to college, and then because no one looked like them and there was no one in their like circle or whatever that had the same experience as them, then they kind of had more trouble then. So one of the things that we had thought that might be an idea is that we know that a lot of the people of color and professors of color, and especially women, are already mentoring so many people. Like they're already kind of tapped out. So we don't want to put more of a burden on them, but maybe if there was an opportunity for graduate students to speak to undergraduates who are interested in biomechanics, that might help kind of show them that, like, hey, there is an opportunity here. I know as a grad student, I don't have a ton of time, but if I could give an hour or two to talk to someone about what they maybe should look for, and either it's an opportunity in biomechanics or just grad school in general, I'd be happy to talk to people about that. So if that's an opportunity that our student membership could kind of do, then that would be great.
I'm gonna piggyback off of what Justin was just saying, because this is something that came up in the Black Biomechanist meeting that we had yesterday, and I'll talk about that a little later, but stick to this point for now. That was one of the things that I kind of brought up that I specifically would like to do within the Black Biomechanist group, but I think actually we could use this in the ASB mentoring that we do. I've participated in that in 2 different years. And from my perspective now, it's always like a very senior professor person talks to us that are in this, you know, graduate school phase, and you could be like master's, PhD, whatever. For the most part, that seems to be the link up. And to me, there's a lot of steps that are in between a senior faculty and somebody who is in grad school. And there may be some components of that mentorship that you're looking for as that graduate student that you're kind of missing because that senior position is so far removed from where you're at. And so I think it may be beneficial, like Justin was saying, to have some of those incremental levels of mentorship. So maybe some of our undergraduates specifically, and I'm thinking within ASB, this could be for institutions as well, but for ASB in particular, we have undergraduate students that are coming. Maybe there can be a mentor within that mentoring session, they can talk to graduate students, because these grad students have just come from the undergrad perspective and can tell them a little bit more in detail than maybe a senior faculty can remember all those years ago, what it was like to make that transition. And then same thing with graduate to maybe postdoc, or postdoc to early career. I think there's a lot of levels of mentoring that we could kind of layer, instead of doing it really this like really top to bottom kind of model. This is something I've talked to with a couple of different people. To switch just a little bit to get back to some of what Lindsay and Jamie was trying to bump up. So I can't speak for the total diversity and inclusion here, but me and Matt McCullough and Kayla Seymour just this year have started the affinity group Black Biomechanists. We had our first meeting last night. We had a really good turnout and it was really great. And we're actually, small plug here, we're having another one tomorrow at 3 p.m. if you want to come check us out. But one of the things that we would like to do is, first and foremost, is to create a space for Black biomechanists that are in within the ASB community. There have been a lot of times where me and Kayla came from the same, we were in graduate school together. So when we travel to conferences, I already have my person who looks like me, so I don't really have to go searching. However, that is a thing that we always found ourselves doing at ASB meetings. And anytime we came across, ooh, there's another Black girl, ooh, there's another Black guy, we should go talk to them. It shouldn't be such, you know, that we really have to scope out so much to try to find these people. So one of the things that we're trying to do with this group is to have that space that's already there, so that people can just come to that and know, hey, there are people here that look like me that I can get in touch with, that I don't have to try so hard to find. And I think that kind of gets back to some of the stuff that someone else was saying at some point. But and then just to get to what we're doing maybe with ASB, it's one thing to do something within the group, but ideally we want this to be something that can contribute to ASB as a whole. So part of what we'd like to do is, from our Black or BIPOC, Black and Indigenous and people of color perspective, is talk about these things amongst ourselves, what we feel are barriers or issues or needs, or maybe resources that we need, and be able to relay that information back to the ASB Diversity Committee, so we can come up with some actual action items and put on maybe events or symposia, have a space in the actual ASB agenda to talk about and address some of these things that we're talking about in this whole conversation. So like Matt was saying, some of these things are in progress, these conversations are happening, and we're trying to find ways to actually implement these in, you know, hopefully as soon as next year's meeting. So those things are in place, but we just have to really continue those conversations and try to translate all of this back to what's our overarching kind of thing.
Thank you, Erica.
And I'll also just remind everybody that the time that ASB is most visible is at the annual meeting, but there's no rule that we can't do things throughout the year, and we should. And especially to help people keep getting more, creating more action. So I know that that's a goal that we have for the upcoming year, is to try to make, to have more events throughout the year. Obviously, we're all getting good at virtual things, so we can do more of these virtual types of events. But, you know, it would be great to have more ideas about, you know, what if we're going to have one in September, what should it be? If we're going to have one in October, what should it be? If we're going to have one in November, what should it be? Let's keep it going.
Hey, Ajit, you know, we usually have the regional ASB meetings, right? What if we thought about, you know, once we go back to normal life, we have online ASB meetings at different points in time. So we have like our one time where we all like to get together, but then we have virtual ones where, you know, that are more frequent, or at different periods of the year, where we can just have this conversation be continuing throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. That could maybe get to, you know, Josh's point earlier about he loves the virtual meetings. There's no reason we couldn't have 2 meetings, I suppose.
Right. It's more accessible, but then also we can check in on these really important efforts, because it's hard when it's once a year we get together to make a lot of progress. But
This is raising her real hand.
I'm raising my real hand, and I'm putting my virtual hand up. Hey, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Liz Schau-Wexler. I'm the president-elect. So at the conclusion of this meeting, I will be the president-elect, and then I'll serve on the presidential line for 3 years. And so actually one of the things that when I wrote my statement prior to the unfortunate George Floyd incident, but one of my presidential statements was trying to increase the inclusion and diversity of ASB in terms of our memberships or participation at conferences, and also trying to increase research involving health disparities in racial areas. So I was at the Black Biomechanist meeting yesterday that Eric and Matt and Kayla put together, and it was great. And so some of the things that I was talking to them and trying to think about how we want to go forward is to increase this pipeline that we're talking about, increase the diversity and involvement, not only starting young, but I just was sending a Slack note to a bunch of them about, hey, how many Black faculty members do we have in ASB? I'm looking around at this group. I know 3 of the guys. Yesterday, one other gentleman said he was an assistant professor, and I said, how many women are out there? And they just told me, oh, there's there's Brooke and Karma. They're out there as women. And I go, oh, great. 4 Black men, 2 Black women as faculty members in ASB. I'm like, we got to work on this, So one of the things that I've heard talking to, last year at the women's event, I was talking to a number of women, and a number were Black. And I said, so what are you going to do? And like, well, I'm going to, go off, get a job, industry, do something, or I might be a teaching faculty member, but I don't want to go tenure system. And I think that we also want to hit the higher level people too, thinking, how can we keep the graduate students to make them become postdocs? And sorry, I am academic, so I am pitching academia. And then how do we get people to go into faculty positions? So those would be some of the things. And other things that I was just talking to some people about, and we're also going to bring in the fellows, ASB fellows that I'm also a member of. How do we continue this outreach? How are we going to add more people of color into this community? And can we reach out to, say, some of the historically Black colleges or Latin serving colleges or indigenous tribal colleges to maybe do some research projects? So a number of us are at Research One universities, where our federal, a lot of funding agencies are looking for, can you reach out and do outreach? So can we make connections with other biomechanists or bring other people into biomechanics at these institutions and bring in maybe connecting with their undergraduates? And then now we can create perhaps a pipeline of undergraduates and graduate students working at these other institutions, bringing them to the R01 schools. And could we make those connections and make great research and bringing people into ASB? So somebody asked a while ago, what is the ASB going to do? And I had to talk personally. I'm hoping the rest of the executive board will be on board, and I'm pretty sure they will be doing some of these initiatives and trying to move forward. So reach out to the Black Biomechanist Affinity Group, because I'm going to be reaching out to them. So if you also have ideas, I'm looking at Erica. She's shaking her head. She's willing. She's willing and ready to do it.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off of Liz's comment, I had an opportunity to moderate a session at the conference this year. And when I got that invitation, it asked me to pick 2 co-moderators. And in selecting the co-moderators to think about gender, racial, ethnic, ability, and LGBTQIA identities. And picking co-moderators, I needed to pick someone who was a peer, so like another I guess, assistant professor, and then someone who was more senior. I want to know, how can we continue to make sure that we have more representation across our membership, but also how can we create opportunities for graduate students and postdocs, because I knew very few co-moderators that I could think of, you know, with respect to race and ethnicity. So I just want to make sure that we're creating opportunities also for our doctoral and postdoctoral members to have these opportunities.
Well, one organizational way that I think probably it's kind of new, so not everyone will know about yet, but we are improving the database for the membership for exactly this type of thing, so that when people go in, they can volunteer. There's a volunteer sheet and you can say what you'd like to be involved in. And then we're less tied to who can I think of, and you can ask for a list, and then I can give you a list of everybody who said they were interested in moderating a session. And if in particular, for example, Brooke, if you're looking for someone who is at a postdoc level, I could give you the list of everybody in that list who is a postdoc. And I hope that that will help for not just this issue, but for committees, for nominating committee, for people for the executive board, that people can nominate, basically self-nominate by putting themselves on that list. So that's one structural thing that we're doing that I hope will help.
I'd also like to make a, sorry.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I'd also just like to make a pitch to address Brooke's question about how to be more aware of who exists. We had a session yesterday with the student group about managing one's brand, but really it's about use of social media and science. And I think it's really important for those of us who are underrepresented to be visible online. And I think that helps address several of the issues we've discussed here. One, people who are undergrads or in high school who might be looking for people who look like them, that's one way that they can find us. Two, for those of us who are faculty, I won't put anybody on blast here, but there's several of you who are students who I know largely because of Twitter and what you post and share. So that is a really helpful way for you all to be, all of us, excuse me, to be more visible, so that when we get to these points where we're asking who can we find, who exists, who's out there, we can come up with names off the top of our head really quickly. So yeah, so just don't, you know, we had talks about barriers to being more vocal online, but, you know, share what you can, have a profile, whether it's Twitter, definitely have a Google Scholar profile. But yeah, I think it'd be great for those of us who are out here just to do what we can so that everyone can see us.
I'm going to plus one that kind of from the perspective of a program director at the National Science Foundation. We are mandated to include diversity is one of our considerations when we form panels. And it is hard for us to find you if you don't put yourself out there. So, you know, encourage your friends, anyone who has a terminal degree, to reach out to program directors and volunteer to review. And if you are comfortable giving us some diversity keywords, that also always helps.
Jonas, are you still there?
We've been trying to get to
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Just, I think I wanted to say a couple of things. I was trying to be very direct, especially with, and now I'm sort of like lost what I really wanted to say, but I personally, I'm international student from Mexico, so first of all, I don't want to like just say that Black people is like, I identify with Black people in the fact that sometimes I see a lot of interactions with Latin American people in similar ways that Black people have right now, and in a way, I'm still unaware of who has a Latin American background in the society of America, in this society. So I think that one of the ways that could help is before coming into the society or the meeting to send an email, because I'm sure you guys, I think that you guys have that information in record, to just be like, hey, this is a group, affinity group that is with perhaps a similar background that you have, and it's now up to me to whether I want to reach out to them or not. So I think that if we have that opportunity to have like previous information of the people that are coming that are probably from that cultural background, similar cultural background, can help to promote more connection with them. And I'm starting to remember what I was going to say, which is the idea of creating mentorship that is at different levels can also help to tackle an issue that never got to be brought up to the rest of the group, that was identifying imposter syndrome. And that's something that happens a lot with people that is like recognized or identified like a minority. And so if we can promote sort of like an idea that someone who is like a mentor of a high school student that is in a PhD level or a master's level can promote this sort of idea that they're doing something that is valuable and that can help me to feel like I can get there, and to kind of slowly but surely kind of break those ideas of imposter syndrome that a lot of us really have, and we don't feel that we can speak about it, and we don't feel comfortable talking about it. But if they see, one of the things that we talk about in our group, it was trying to identify role models that we don't really see often. And I think that the imposter syndrome, from my perspective, it comes from this idea that I don't see anybody that is a Latin American person that is in a position, or at least I'm not aware of it. And so just trying to throw some ideas to like include a group like me, or give some information to people like me, that then we have the job, or we have the opportunity to reach out to them and make them aware of who I am or who they are.
That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. Alexa, I see a hand.
Yeah, so I guess Brooke kind of mentioned when she talked about people who to think about when she was talking for co-moderators. I guess in the 6 years that I've been a part of ASB, I've seen like very minimal mention of like LGBTQ populations. And I know that that is a minority that is much more hidden and less out there, and for some people can be detrimental if they are out. But I think that that's an important part that I guess I haven't necessarily seen addressed in ASB, but I would like to see addressed more in terms of whether or not it's an affinity group, so you know who those individuals are, and knowing that they have a safe space of other people who are like them. Especially as a student who's like coming up now, postdoc, not knowing who those individuals are, or knowing who your allies may be, and who to have those conversations with when you have difficult situations that is an LGBTQ that's in your area, either of research or just in biomechanics in general. So I guess another thing to kind of add to the pot.
I would just make one comment on affinity groups, which is absolutely the more the merrier. And in the past, they've been member organized and then promoted at the meetings. And so I think what is needed for some of these groups is continuity, where there have been, for example, an LGBTQ affinity group in past years, and then I don't know if if there is one this year. I didn't see one on the channel. So, but I think there's a lot of support, for example, from the executive board, but it's not necessarily something where we're going to form one and say, go show up here, because I don't really think that's appropriate for us to insert ourselves in different communities, like those communities to feel that they're running their own, they have ownership, right, of their space. So I would just encourage, I know that's difficult when you're a new person coming in, so maybe more established folks who are in each of these groups, as the Black biomechanists have done, to continue to grow those. But we can always provide a space for those groups to meet.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to see like that as an affinity group.
Absolutely.
But I think finding senior people to get that started or running, because you're right, like as a student, like I don't feel like that's my place, or that I would be able to get enough traction or notice for that to be successful.
There was one at North Carolina, right, Kate?
Yeah. There was. We had, well, that was quite a year.
Yeah.
Crappiness situation that we were very proactively addressing.
Actively like a part of ASB for the last 6 years, and North Carolina is the one year that I didn't go because I was moving for my PhD. And everybody was like, yeah, North Carolina, that happened. And I'm like, cool, well, that was the one I wasn't at. But it's like, you want to see that every year.
Absolutely. So yeah.
Knowing who those senior people are to kind of help you get that started, especially because LGBTQ is not like an outwardly recognized thing if people don't promote themselves as LGBTQ.
And I was going to say that too in response to Jonas, that sometimes it's not as visible, and LGBTQ is similar, so it can be harder to find.
We actually had that exact issue.
I'm Hispanic, my name doesn't reflect it. I mean, there are other people too in the group but if you have to stand up and say hi to organize those groups. So more of us need to stand up and say hi and organize these groups for sure.
Well, and maybe to like build some consistency, like we'll have, as we said, kind of had a meeting at like one annual meeting several years ago. And so the people who are kind of part of that, they know each other, but it doesn't carry on year to year. So maybe things like, sorry?
I said, and not as a formal thing, right, Kate?
Right, not as a formal thing. So maybe more of this, like rather than having all these kind of affinity meetings being linked to when we gather in person, we're kind of learning now how to communicate. Like I think with Slack, it's been really cool that we've had like these asynchronous ways of communicating. And so maybe using platforms like that to kind of carry these not only scientific discussions, but also affinity group discussions and a place to gather and talk might be a way we could address that moving forward.
Just a quick shout out to Jeremy Crenshaw. Actually, we're on the program committee together, and he's been texting about creating a Slack channel #diversity. So, yay, Jeremy.
The other
one sec. Jordan has set up a space for that, for diversity Slack. So I wanted Jordan to just.
So we wanted to have a space, like understanding that this 2-hour meeting was not going to be enough and it was going to be a lot of sparking conversations. I did set up a Slack channel that following this meeting, we're going to send out a compiled Google Doc, as well as I think a recording of the whole session and an invitation to the Slack channel. So it's free form right now. We hope that it'll be a space where people can continue conversations, post resources. If people have had success at their institutions about implementing any of the action items that we talked about or any others, and being able to share that. But I think it can be a space for other channels to be created. And I hope that people are active on that channel or on the workspace and creating other channels.
And Jordan, I think to exactly that point, to also address Alexa, like if we have a standing location that persists outside of the meeting, then there can be channels for these kinds of affinity groups, and then it's not also all on, specific members to make sure there's continuity in that affinity group and that new members can find it without having to, figure out people's background.
Well, and that's part of why we wanted to create this space outside of like the ASB2020's Slack, space so that it can perpetuate going forward. And we will absolutely share that with not just people who were here, but anybody more broadly. It's the ASB. I have the full list of everybody who showed an interest, but then we can also publicize it more broadly than that.
To answer Stephanie very quickly, well, maybe not Stephanie, but same thing as what Robin was saying. I know at least for our group, for the Black Biomechanists, we plan to also make a Slack workspace outside of ASB 2020 so that we can also continue connecting and continuing some of these conversations. So we may or may not have one within the official ASB 2020, but we definitely plan to have a separate one. So if anybody's interested in that too, please feel free to contact either myself or Kayla Seymour or Matt McCullough, and we can add you to those workspaces once we get those set up.
And just a technical note about that. So because we have the free version of Slack, we're limited to 10,000 messages. So if we're looking for long-term continuity, then the ASB 2020, I don't know actually if we're gonna, I think we're gonna keep it open, but eventually we'll hit 10,000 messages and all the history will be lost.
Yeah. So and there may be also a place, and we can discuss, the board can discuss this as well, if there is a need for some financial component to have a Slack that isn't the free version so that we can continue with the continuity. I think that's also something that could be sort of discussed as a board, and maybe a very good idea.
I do want to say about the finances of being on the program committee. We had like $500 to put on this entire conference because it's a nonprofit, it's all volunteer, right? And the only income that we have is from the whatever money we charge for the conference and then from sponsors. So we made it free for students. We made it super cheap, $50. And then we basically had to go around to sponsors and keep begging every time, like a spatial chat channel for one day was $300. So Lena Tang contacted the creator of spatial chat and basically sweet talked him into giving us a discount. I mean, we have been working this. So I don't mean to say don't ask for money at all, but having just gone through a year of being like, oh, if only we had money.
Thank you for bringing that forward. That's also important to understand.
Yeah, I wanted to just say maybe two things about Slack and affinity groups. So I don't think you actually need to have the paid version for there to be continuity. After 10,000 messages, it will just delete the older ones. So if there are things that you would like to save, you could perhaps combine it with, say, a Google Drive. For example, that's what we do with the early career, and that's also what New PI Slack does. The second thing I wanted to say is about creating these affinity groups, and specifically if you're doing it on Slack, you need buy-in. If people don't contribute to your Slack or whatever method you use, it will die. And so you have to figure out how to get that buy-in, I guess.
Very important. Well, somebody was talking.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna on what Jessica said. I agree with that. That you do have to establish that buy-in, but you're not just limited to Slack. Slack is just the space where you can do some good discussions amongst many people, but you do need to still establish a presence of some sort outside of that. And that was something that we had talked about for at least the Black Biomechanist group, that right now, most of the advertising that we're doing is on my Twitter account, which is totally fine. I don't mind that because I don't really tweet about much else off of there right now. But we plan to put some social media presence in place for the group so that we can get some of that so-called buy-in and really be able to advertise ourselves outside of that, but then have a dedicated place to do those discussions, like using Slack or maybe some other kind of platform. So I would definitely say, you have to use multiple resources to keep things going and keep people buying in and being interested. But yeah, it's just a combination of a couple of those things, but definitely have to work outside of Slack to get your presence known for sure.
I just want to say, if you have any interest in helping out in the Black Biomechanics group, you do not have to be Black. We also welcome allies. We especially welcome allies. We need your help. And like Erica was saying, we have to get buy-in outside of, well, actually on a social media platform. And right now, all the work is being done by Erica, I, Matt. We have some volunteers that have reached out to us, but it's going to be a group effort. So if you have any expertise in advertising, in graphic design, in getting the word out to multiple people, if you have connections in funding resources, if you are good at academic mentoring, like, feel free to join the group. We would love to have you.
I think what also could be important for this is like promotion from ASB, and I don't know like who runs social media, but ASB also promoting these affinity groups as well to help continue to get the word out, because obviously the main ASB social media has more followers than everybody else. So I don't know if there's a way to make sure that that's a thing.
Noted.
Tag ASB
Noted.
retweeted.
Yeah, right. You tag, the ASB, or in this case, the meeting that we're in right now. They've been doing pretty good about picking this up. But yeah,
And our
definitely
regular,
noted.
not just at the meeting, our regular ASB.
ASB one is
social
fantastic.
media,
Yeah.
if you tag them, they'll retweet.
The ASB Twitter was like closed for
Yeah,
like
we
a few
fixed that.
months this year.
We fixed
So
that.
there was like a big lag in ASB social media for like a few months, up until like a couple of weeks ago. So that might have been some of the quiet on the ASB social front.
Yeah, we had a little issue. It's resolved now, so we're good.
It works now, but just if people felt like there was radio silence from ASB in recent history, that was part of the issue.
Right.
Maybe people have had enough for this evening. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to before I don't want to stop, but I just want to make sure I'm seeing all these nice thank yous to Robin and me and Jordan, but I also want to acknowledge the other members of the diversity committee. So that's Joan Bechtold from University of Minnesota, Matt McCullough from North Carolina A&T, Becky Zifchak from West Point, Susan D. Krager from Novell, and Alyssa Olivas from UT El Paso. So, and if anybody else wants to be on the diversity committee, please let me know.
And fill out the form for Kate when she sends it, because then it gets into the database as well.
At
So
any
that
time, you
helps.
can go into the membership portal and mark what you would like to
Update that.
volunteer for. And then we also record who has done things in past years, so that we also keep that in mind when we're looking for awards and nominating and all that sort of thing. So definitely keep a record of all your awesome contributions, of which there are many.
I feel like it goes back to Lindsay's point too, that like ASB is, what is ASB doing? Like ASB's been trying, this has been an extended effort, right? So Erica told the story about how, like 2015, she and Matt were like, oh, you should tell the story. I don't want to tell the story for you. It took a while for Black biomechanists to really gel. And what like we do is the point I'm trying to make, and we do have these channels in ASB. We do have a strong diversity committee. There is a member of the diversity committee is on the executive board. So the diversity committee gets a vote. And if there are other ways, like this is to Kate's question earlier about what you're looking for ideas from the membership. Like if there are other ways that we can institutionally embed DEI as a priority, I think everybody's open to it.
I'm going to stay as long as people want to stay. So, if there's more conversations to be had.
I have to get Ajit and my kids to bed.
Yeah, mine, I think, went to bed without me. That happens.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut out too because I gotta put mine to bed. So, but this is great. Thanks for putting this together and for the extended conversation time.
I appreciate everybody's staying around and your insights, and please do continue to let us know how we can continue to do the things that are important to help.
It's great to see everyone. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you on Friday at 3.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Robin, I had the idea or something I wanted to talk about.
Sure.
So I recently, one of my postdoc associations sent out like kind of a guideline from UCSF about like how to approach difficult conversations with your PI, like from a student. Or I'm wondering if like the D&I committee could work on something like that, where it's like a guideline for specifically biomechanics lab. How can we approach difficult conversations in our labs when we maybe never had to do it before? So.
Oh, that's a great, that's an absolutely great suggestion. And I know not just the difficult conversations between the student and a mentor are a challenge, but also just the interpersonal workings in a research lab and how to even have a difficult conversation with, say, an undergrad that's working with you, or, you know, a fellow graduate student. I think all of that is very important, and there are a lot of resources out there. The one you're mentioning, I know the University of Wisconsin-Madison does a lot of training in this space that I've had the privilege of being involved with. So definitely, I think it's things that, like this, that we just need to collate from everything that everybody brought forward on, like, what are the things that are kind of resonating right now, and how do we begin to develop either programming at the meeting or, you know, this idea of between meetings. What do we do? How do we help? What kind of resources are really going to be effective in helping people advance both these missions, but then also their career individually? So thank you for bringing that forward. It is officially recorded in the recording from today, and a very true one. Difficult conversations is not something any of us are typically, until we end up getting put into a leadership training course, aren't trained to have. And some people are more comfortable than others having those conversations. And so I think that's a great point.
Anna, did you find that, you said it was like a guideline kind of a thing? Like I mean, do you feel like that's effective, or do we need to have like role modeling, like we're going to get together and have difficult conversations on Zoom for 2 hours? I'm curious about, like, you know, where does it actually start to be effective?
Great. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a good point. I think it does have to, it has to come from a place that's genuine and not, you know, like just superficial, like we're, yeah.
So we've done it. I'm wondering what you would think about the idea, and this is one we've tried with faculty, teaching them how to start to do this. It could work for postdocs, grad students, whatever, but scenario-based conversations, right? We'll put forward a scenario, and we've modified some so that they are more, for us, more engineering appropriate, but they could be biomechanics, right? And then have small groups that have kind of know each other. Talk through, like, how would you respond to this? What does this look like? How would you have this conversation, right? Those seem to be ways that work a little bit better than, like, here's a prescriptive, like, walk into your faculty member and say this and then this, and, right? Because there's a lot of nuance to having those conversations, I think, is, at least that's what I'm taking from Ajit's question. It's like, it's a little hard to do that as a, like, here's your prescriptive.
Yeah, right. No, yeah.
Actually, you know, this exact topic was brought up by the ASB fellows, and we had this discussion. Sort of, we've been talking, one of the things about the fellows were kind of like, how do we get some of the things out to other people? So Joe McNick was telling us about a guy at a local farmer's market, and he was a retired gentleman, and he set up a tent at the farmer's market, and he said, ask me any questions. Yeah. And then he eventually had to recruit more people because people kept coming up and he couldn't answer all the questions. So we were thinking about having what we call ASB Fellows tent during the conference, where we'd be sitting there and come and ask us questions. But there was another scenario we thought about, having exactly what Robin was talking about, these little vignettes where we could go through and talking about how to address some of these things. So it is something that the fellows have been thinking about, and we've recently formed what's called the Council of Fellows.
Sounds really official, doesn't it?
It sounds official, and so they've got like the president, the vice president, and the secretary, and we're hoping one of them will show up on the executive board to interact between the fellows and such. And the fellows right now is a fairly small group. It's only a little bit over 40 people, about 33 men and 9 women or so.
Yeah.
And then we actually, the most recent fellows are 3 women that were just added. And additionally, we're looking at the membership list. They're all like, poor Kate's going to be super busy sending membership lists out to everybody, all these different groups, looking to like, how do we look at the diversity of the membership and trying to add them. But there are groups trying to think about how can we help in addition to some of the, you know, the faculty. I mean, I was really surprised how many different professional development events went on at all different levels this year. You know, Kim Bigelow and I in 2010 or so, we had what we think, at least in this millennia, the first junior faculty mentoring event in 2010 that we put together. And it was really great to see how much more is going on now.
Yeah. And I think you'll probably continue to see some more of that if that's what the membership is asking for, right? And I think we're bringing that in from other societies that we're all involved with that are starting to do a lot more professional development type programming at meetings. And I think that's a great option, right? Like you can run it up against a scientific session and people can make good choices to, you know, which one. It's hard to have everything unopposed. If you have the pleasure of sitting on a program committee, that's an almost impossible thing to do because there's so much great science and there's so many things that we want to talk about. So
we just go earlier and later. That's all it is.
Earlier, later in the day, or more days, or right? Like
yeah, it's all of those trying to balance it out. You know, when I was program chair in 2012, we only had 500 or 600 people, and now we're over 1,000, right? So, and trying to be able to handle that many people and get out the science and also get opportunities for networking. I know I'm just as exhausted doing this virtual conference as the real one, and I'm sure you all are too, except I realized there's actually no literal lunch break for us, where we would, in the real conference, you get a lunch break. You at least get to eat and talk, but it's like, I got 5 minutes. I got to grab something to eat.
Or just eat while you're on the Zoom. It's okay.
Like, well, you still got to grab the food. That's the problem. You got to have it kind of ready-ish.
I've had a lot of yogurt in the last few days that I've been grabbing from the fridge.
I'm killing my diet.
Right?
I'm sporting the hat, just so you know, because I'm doing the COVID cough. It's my COVID coughed. So, you know, I haven't had my hair cut in 4 months and I had to run out to meet one of my new students, and I had to put my hat on because I'm like kind of not wanting to show how old I really am.
We just go with it. Come on, Liz. We're just going to own whatever it is right now.
So I'm like, yeah, I'll just show up with my baseball hat. It'd be cool.
It's fine. It's all good. There's no judgment in COVID. The number of men I have seen show up now with like full-on beards, and I'm like, we just gave up on shaving. We've given up on coloring our hair. It's all fine.
Yeah. I can't quite get it into ponytail. I'm very good at pigtails, but I thought, you know, I don't think showing up in pigtails is...
I think it would have been fine.
We're all friends. It's good. We're all friends.
It's good. It's good. Are there other things that those of you who have stayed around with us want to talk about anymore? Or we're just so much fun to hang out.
I'm about to head out, but I just want to add, you know, we've kind of said it on and off, but not, you know, we've tried this out in a virtual format. I think we've kind of shown ourselves that we can do this and also could do it more often. I know I'll give a shout out to Anna, who's organized some cool events for women in biomechanics recently. But I think having regular conversations, even if it's not every member can make it to every conversation every time. It's still a dialogue that happens. And if you're able to tune in, you do. And, you know, then we don't always have Zooms with 500 people, but if, you know, 50 people have a good conversation once a month, and then like, you know, we kind of share that and keep the conversation going. I know when we have the meeting in person, right, like we can't all travel to be together often, but with a virtual meeting, it's a lot easier to be like, oh yeah, I can like log in for a couple hours and chat, you know, without that same pressure. Like, I think we've kind of done this virtual conference in the same whirlwind of like, we need to cram as much into 4 days because that's how we do conferences. But like, you know, since none of us had to travel, we have a little bit more flexibility. I know this meeting we've kind of done is like a, how do we turn what we used to do into this? But now as we kind of figure out the virtual situation, we could start to think of how we could, as a society, have a little bit more of regular interaction as we get better at this. So just wanted to add that, but thank you all. It's been a fun conversation, and glad to at least see you this way.
Right. Virtually. See everyone.
I know.
Absolutely.
So,
Good to see you again.
so, bye, and thank you.
I'm gonna go eat.
Go eat. Yeah, that's
Good
okay.
seeing you all. Good talking to you. Feel free to send me comments, questions, anything. As the incoming president-elect, I'll try as best as I can to address your issues. Take care. Bye.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so, so much for this opportunity and for this session. And for all your service.
Appreciate you staying around. Thanks.
Thanks for organizing. I was mostly just, I'm the incoming student rep. I don't know if people know that or not. I was just trying to make sure that caught stuff if people wanted students to do stuff, so, or could do stuff, because
you never know.
Thanks.
You can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Becky was just lurking for the whole time, and now she's just showing us.
I know.
Yeah.
I was on for a little bit earlier.
She was on and
But
off.
you were on the 5th page.
She was on the 5th page, probably.
It's been really encouraging for me to hear, well, it has taken many, many years being the student rep in 2008 to 2010 when the first diversity event I'm aware of that Matt McCullough organized, and as student rep, I was kind of tasked to work on it, and just actually hearing how many people are showing up and talking compared to having about 20 people, and they were 20 with a lot of them being very quiet people. So it's hard to have ideas as to how to move forward when people are being very quiet and not quite sure what to share. And I think some of that is work that's been done over the past 11 years to get to now. There's tons of work still to do, but at least getting more people talking and ideas helps progress happen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.